My name is Mary Lichty Adams, and I am a member of the Board of Trustees of this congregation. Welcome to you all. The Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Elkhart is a welcoming community, encouraging religious freedom, nurturing individual spiritual and ethical growth, celebrating diversity, and promoting a just and sustainable world. If you are a visitor with us this morning, we would love to have you join us for coffee after the service so that we can get to know you better. And that will happen in the gathering place on the other side of the building. Also, if now is a great time for you to turn your cell phones off or to vibrate so that it doesn't interrupt the service. If you have hearing issues, I believe at the audio desk in the back, they have devices that may be helpful to you to enjoy. So enjoy.
Good morning. I'm Judy Darnell, and I have our fellowship life this morning. A big thank you to everybody who helped with the county road cleanup yesterday, especially Steve Kripe, who organized the venture, so thank you again. And he will continue this announcement after I'm done. Currently, we have a basket near the pantry shelves for donated items for the women's shelter. It gets full about every 3 to 6 weeks, and we need a new person to take these to the women's shelter downtown. It's a very easy process, so if interested, please see Janelle, who is waving her hand and standing up. So, okay. The society What's that? Ah. The Society of Radical Readers will be reading Octavia Butler's Parable of Talents, which is the sequel to the Parable of the Sower, which was this month's Hard to Put Down selection. Set in the 2040s, it is the continuation of an arc into our possible future, reflecting our current social and environmental conditions. We will meet here at UUFE at 7 o'clock on June 5th to discuss the book. And remember that after potluck on the 21st, we will have our annual congregational meeting, where we will review committee and board reports and approve the budget and elect officers for the upcoming church year. If you've been a member since March 21st, you are eligible to vote. In any case, it's a good way to learn more about how our church functions. As many of you will remember, Mike and I will be stepping down from our responsibilities here as we prepare to move out of the area. That means there are several opportunities for leadership. The Building and Grounds Committee needs a chair, fellowship focus an editor or two, and 2 or 3 people to rotate Sunday school classes. Speak with Mike or me after the service to find out more. And last week's attendance was 86 adults, teens, and children in person, online, and on YouTube. Wow. Our collection of $189 goes to our sustainability fund, which helps fund the maintenance and repairs of our buildings and grounds. Thank you.
A big thank you yesterday to the following people: Ken Claiborne, Mike and Judy Darnell, Randy Demerly, Ron and Linda Gill, Jenny Hopper, Katrina and Kara Conan, I knew I'd mess her name up, Konopinski, I think that's right, Konopinski, okay. Hilton and Marianne Rausch, Carl Rust, and Laura Snow. We were all on our way home by 10 o'clock and we got the entire road done. Thank you.
That's wonderful news. I'm going to make one other little announcement. This is the first Sunday of the month, and so this room will be cleaned next week. So after the service, we need to pick up the chairs and hymnals and put them against the walls. I'm going to make one other little announcement. I was going to do it when I introduced Jimmy, but instead I'm going to say it now. Usually at the bottom of our order of service, the worship associate lots of times tries to pick a little quote that might be appropriate for the service topic, and it didn't get printed because it is way down at the bottom. But I want to say that setting healthy boundaries, I found a quote that says, givers need to set boundaries because takers rarely do, and that's by Elise Ballard. And now we ring the gong 3 times, once for those who came before us and made a place for us. Once for those of us who are here now. And once for those who will come after us and build on the dream. The chalice lighting is on my chair. The chalice lighting is from George G. Davis. To be strong enough to gain some mastery over ourselves, and humble enough to be willing to learn from others. To be brave enough to choose the right road, no matter how hard it may be, and patient enough to keep on in spite of obstacles. To be wise enough to know our own shortcomings, and honest enough to admit the excellence in others. To be proud enough to command the respect of strong individuals, and gentle enough to win the love of little children, to be careful enough to protect the goods of others, and generous enough to share our own. This is our aspiration for today. And now if you would join me in reciting our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant. And now we'll have Mary Perrin's morning music.
Good morning. Ever since someone asked me to exchange next week for another time, and I knew I was going to do the musing today, I mused and mused and mused and mused all week. And I couldn't think of the word boundaries without thinking of the word balance. And I couldn't think of balance without thinking of respect. And I couldn't think of respect without thinking of responsibility. And it kept on coming in, and I thought, oh my God, I've got to hone this in and not speak for an hour, but 5 minutes. So I just thought of my New England Irish Catholic upbringing and how I was raised with boundaries that only had to do with patriarchy, both in society and in families and in religion. And I married at 18 and a half, and by 15 years I knew that my marriage wasn't what I thought a marriage could be. I had more intimacy with casual friends than I seemed to have with the husband I'd married. And so I tried marriage encounters and counseling and everything under the sun. And by 9 years later, I decided, I know marriage is till death do you part, but this marriage is dead and I'm clinging to a corpse, and that's awfully damn sick. And so I decided to get legally amputated, and it worked for me. I began to have respect for myself. I took responsibility for whatever I could do in the marriage and let go of the rest. And that's what I condensed it to. Thank you.
And now the offering will be collected. And since it's the first Sunday, I thought it was this Sunday that is the Sustainability Fund. If we can get 2 Sundays of sustainability, we'll do it. But I think that the offering today will, the entire thing will go to the UUFE Sustainability Fund. So we appreciate your giving generously. Thank you.
Today's hymns are new, so I think Lizzie's going to play all the way through as an introduction. That'll help you. This first one, we're all over the map, full octave range, so you'll have to help me on the high notes, but we'll get through it. Stand if you're willing and able, and please turn to 130 and sing O Liberating Rose.
Chose the hymn for the words, not for the ease of leading or singing. Thank you. It sounded great in the front row. I got to hear you all. And I'm so happy to welcome Jimmy Clifton, Reverend Dr. Jimmy Clifton, to our pulpit again today, one of our favorite speakers.
Good morning. Always got to get prepared here. I think I'll start off as always with a joke. Seems to go well at times. So the neighbors were standing in their yards talking across the fence. Two gentlemen. And one says to the other, "My wife doesn't think I respect her boundaries." And the other guy said, "Is that what she told you?" He said, "No, I read it in her diary." That's not a personal reflection. I've spoken here long enough that you know that even though I identify as a Christian, that I'm not a fanatic, I'm not a fundamentalist. I've talked to a number of you on the phone, a number of you after services. We've texted, we've emailed. So again, you know me pretty well. So you know whenever I preach and talk in Christian terms and use words like Jesus, prayer, those things, that I do so not to try to convert anybody or save your soul, whatever that means, but because something in that terminology is relevant to the message. And so I want to do that today by reading a few lines from the New Testament, Matthew 14. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the news about Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This man is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead. This is why great miracles were wrought by him." For Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had said to him, "It is unlawful to have her as your wife." So Herod wanted to kill him. But he was afraid of the people because they accepted him as a prophet. When Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the guests, and it pleased Herod. He therefore swore to her with oaths that he would give her anything that she would ask. And she, because she was instructed by her mother, said, "Give me right here on a tray the head of John the Baptist." And the king was very sorry. But because of the oaths and the guests, he commanded that it be given to her. So he sent and had John beheaded in prison. And his head was brought in on a tray and given to the girl, and she took it to her mother. Then the disciples came and took up his body and buried it. And they came and informed Jesus. When Jesus heard of it, he departed by boat and went to a solitary place. What we have here are the disciples of Jesus, friends of John, who are in a very dark place. And you and I, we know about being in dark places, don't we? We've all been in some very dark places in our lives. But here are these disciples, men and women. Yes, Jesus had women disciples. Men and women who were in a very dark place. They were scared. They felt alone. They were disillusioned. They were distraught. They were depressed. They were sad. They were experiencing grief and loss because one of their own had just been beheaded. And there they were in that dark place of disillusionment and fear. Fear that now perhaps one of them would be next to be killed. But then there comes Jesus, and they go and tell Jesus. And what does the Bible say Jesus did? He left. He left them there in that darkness. He left them there in that despair. Some translations say he immediately left, indicating there was no interaction at all, no words spoken at all. And from what we know about Jesus, based mostly on this book, and some historical writings, and many fictional writings, it doesn't seem like this is something he would have done. From what we understand, he would have been a man of compassion and kindness. He would have ministered to them, prayed with them, hugged them, comforted them. But the Bible says he left. Was Jesus being selfish here? No. Jesus was setting a boundary. He was engaging in self-care. He had to deal with his own grief and his own loss. He had to deal with his own disillusionment and his sadness before he was able to minister and comfort and hug the disciples who were in their state of darkness. The word boundaries has been with us since the late 80s, early 90s. And today, just about every time we look around, read something, the word boundaries is there. And yet, in all of this time, we really haven't done a very good job with boundaries, have we? Oh, we can set boundaries easily. Don't call me after 9 o'clock. Don't text me after 10 o'clock. Don't walk into my room without knocking on the door. We can set them easily. But the problem is not in the setting of boundaries. The problem is in the maintaining of those boundaries. And those boundaries are violated for most of us, I'm going to say. Most of us on a daily basis. We allow our boundaries to be violated. And then what do? Then we complain. Every time I tell him, tell her, tell them not to do things, go ahead and do it anyway. But yet we welcome it by allowing our boundaries to be trespassed, by allowing our boundaries to be crossed, by allowing our boundaries to be violated. What are boundaries? Boundaries are a set of guidelines put into practice to ensure our spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Simple, but not so simple. Because again, we can set them, but we struggle maintaining them. And we can set boundaries when it comes to our time, our emotions, our values, and our space. When it comes to setting boundaries for our time, we have to realize that our time is our time. And we are entitled to do with our time whatever we want to do. We don't have to acquiesce to anybody when it comes to how we spend our time. We don't have to give our time to anyone that we don't want to. How many of us have said over and over in our lives, I wish I had more time? And the reason we don't is that we constantly allow people to violate our time, to take the time away from us that we want to use, either to be alone or maybe to spend it with someone of choice, rather than being forced to spend time with those we don't want to spend time with. Perhaps someone who has constantly bashed us, dissed us, as the saying is, disrespected us. We need to be able to set healthy boundaries and not allow anyone to disrespect us, not allow anyone to treat us in a cruel manner. We have the right to use our time the way that we would like. But we find ourselves many times doing things for people that they could do on their own. And we're wasting our time by enabling people when we do things for them that they could do themselves. And then we have a right to set boundaries when it comes to our emotions. Emotional regulation is a big issue in America today. Many of us struggle with regulating our emotions. And one of the reasons we struggle with regulating our emotions is that we allow our boundaries, our emotional boundaries, to be violated. We need to protect our emotions. Self-protecting of our emotions is good. We should be able to remove ourselves from people and situations where we experience emotional distress. And that's a word we used to hear years ago. We don't hear that much anymore, do we? Emotional distress. But how many of us can honestly sit here this morning and say, there hasn't been a single day this week that we haven't been in some state of emotional distress because of some person or some situation that has violated our emotional boundaries. And oftentimes, those boundaries are violated by people who are very thoughtless, only caring about themselves, not really caring about us as individuals, not really caring about us as human beings, not really caring about us as people who have a right to say and to do what we please as long as we don't violate the boundaries of others and as long as we don't hurt other people. We need to protect our emotional boundaries. Emotions are good. whether they're negative emotions or positive emotions. All emotions are good. We were given those emotions to experience the various situations in life that we have to deal with. And it's very hard to experience healthy emotional boundaries when we allow them to be violated, when we allow them to be trespassed. And then we have the right to our values, to set boundaries when it comes to our values. How many of us know right now what our core values are? I bet some of us would struggle saying what our core values are. Honesty, integrity, we keep our word. Do we know what our core values are? And if we do know what they are, do we allow them to be violated? Do we allow others to define us by their values? And we see a lot of that today, don't we? If we don't live up to the values of other people, other groups, other religions, other people's politics, then we're discounted. Then we're seen as no good. We're seen as wrong. We're seen as bad. Because those people, those groups do not allow us to have our own values. And we need to set boundaries when it comes to our values. These are my values. These are what are dear to me. These are the principles I live by. These are the principles by which I treat other people. These are the principles by which I treat my family. And I'm going to define my values. And I'm going to set boundaries and not allow you or anyone else to define my values for me. And if we have those in our midst who disagree with our values, that's fine. But we do not violate our values. When we violate our values, we basically violate our conscience. And what happens when we violate our conscience? We have some guilt feelings that stem from that. And most of us live lives of guilt because we have constantly violated our consciences. We do things we just normally wouldn't do because we are allowing other people to define us, other people to judge us and condemn us and criticize us. We forget that we are individuals who have rights. And we need to let those rights be a part of us every single day of the week. Boundaries of time, boundaries of emotions, boundaries of values, and then boundaries of space. That's a big one. And I'm very guilty of that. Self-disclosure. As you know, I grew up in the South. And in the South, we all hug people. We do. We're just huggers. And having been a pastor since 1981, I'm a hugger. But I have found myself, it's been pointed out as well, that I violate those boundaries at times. I just go hug anybody. And I've discovered over the years that there are people who don't like to be hugged. And I get that, and I understand that. And I've really had to work on that. And there may be some of you here this morning who haven't liked me hugging you. I want you to let me know. I'll be okay. I got my big boy britches on today. I'll be okay with that. Some people just don't like that. Some people like to be touched. And there could be a lot of reasons for that. And I need to understand that. And so do all of us. We need to be empathetic towards that. But we don't allow others to violate our space. Our space is very valuable. Our space, our physical, our emotional space is very valuable. And we should be able to allow it at whoever we want. We shouldn't be able to allow other people to just walk in on us, violate our space. We have the right to our privacy. How many people today feel that their rights to privacy are being violated? Not just by people we live with, but people in general. How many people feel like various political beliefs are violating our space, violating our privacy? And I know we don't talk politics here. I never really talk politics in church. But sometimes we have to face the reality. There are groups of people in our country who are trying to violate our privacy. We have the right to control our own lives. We have the right to control our own bodies. We have the right to control our own beliefs. We have the right to define ourselves the way we want to define ourselves, and no one else should be able to say, this is what you are, this is what you should do, this is what you should believe. We are not going to allow you to have any kind of control over yourself. We're going to tell you what's right. Most of us are old enough to know what's right. And most of us are old enough to know what's right for us. We don't need anybody else to come in and tell us otherwise. So one of the issues when it comes to setting boundaries and maintaining boundaries is that we have difficulty saying no, don't we? And who do we have the most difficulty with when it comes to saying no, to protecting our boundaries? Somebody pointed to himself. Yeah. That's true. But let's take it a step further. Family. Family will violate our boundaries before anybody else will. And they will do it with this simple expression, yeah, but we're family. Just because we're family doesn't give us any right to violate someone's boundaries. It is okay to say no. We don't have to feel guilty when we say no. That's a boundary we've set. If I don't want to do something, if I don't feel like doing something, that should be my right and my privilege. And I'm not going to feel guilty by saying no. Because what happens when we constantly give in and let people violate our boundaries by not saying no, we become exhausted. Spiritually exhausted, physically exhausted, mentally exhausted, emotionally exhausted. We're tired. We just can't go on any further. But there's that knock on the door. There's that phone that rings. And we muster whatever strength we have left to do whatever we're asked to do. Because we won't say no. And it is okay to say no. And it's okay to set boundaries with families as well. Sometimes we have to take the word family out of the equation. If we wouldn't allow anyone else to violate a certain boundary of ours, why should we allow family to do that? They're just human beings like everybody else. So how do we say no? I know it would be easy just to say no. But there's several things down here. You know, since I quoted the Bible this morning, I'll quote it one more time. There's a verse that says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. That should be that simple. We can say no by saying, I'm not comfortable with this. How often do we do things we're not comfortable with? Because somebody asked us to. Because we felt guilty if we didn't do it. If we're not comfortable, we need to be able to go with that. Because we have the right to be comfortable. Do we not? Sure we do. We have the right to say, please don't do that, when somebody is about to or has violated our boundaries. Please don't do that. Don't talk to me that way. I don't like it. We have the right to say that. I can't do that for you. There are times that we just can't do something. But we will make every effort to do it, even if it's half-hearted, because, again, we can't say no. This doesn't work for me. How oftentimes have we done things for someone, ask us a favor, and it just didn't work for us, but we did it anyway. And then we beat ourselves up about it afterwards, don't we? Why did I do that? I really didn't want to do that. I should have said no. It's too late. But it's not too late to say no the next time. I've decided not to. We have a right to our decisions, don't we? Again, we have many people in this country today who are trying to make decisions for us in every aspect of our lives. And we really need to stand up to that boundary. If there's one boundary today that I would strongly encourage you to really set and maintain, it's that boundary of not allowing anyone to make decisions for you about anything you do in your life or with your life. Because you're going to have those people who are constantly going to be coming at you to do that. This is not acceptable. That's a tough one, isn't it? We know what's acceptable, don't we? Why do we struggle telling people? This is not acceptable. This is unacceptable. We need to practice that. And then finally, I don't want to do that. We have that right as well. I don't want to. Without explanation. We often find that we say things, we try to maintain a boundary, and then they keep on and on and on. Yeah, come on, yeah, come, but, and we give in. That's what happens when we explain saying no. That's what happens when we say, I don't want to, and we offer explanations why we don't want to. We end up giving in because they keep on and on and on. I don't want to. I'm not comfortable with that. No, without explanation. Now, out of courtesy, maybe, out of respect for someone you really like, maybe you want to give an explanation. That's okay. But do not give an explanation out of guilt. We have a right to be who we are. And we need to make a concerted effort, a strong effort, every single day of the week to be who we are, to stand by our principles, to maintain our boundaries, and to live healthy lives physically, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. Thank you. So now you get to ask me questions, and Joan's going to answer them. I guess Ken's going to answer them then. See, there you go, boundaries, yes. I should have said there is an exception.
Well, we've, thanks for being here and
Thank you for
always
having
giving
me.
us a lot of energy. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
The elephant in the room, the biggest boundary we have right now is the shootings, the mass shootings. And I think that when we've gone to the point where we can say one word, Texas, Sandy Hook, Minneapolis, and that means everything to us. But we're, I don't think the sky is falling, the world is ending. I think we can maintain our civility, our democracy, and all of those things. I don't go there and then try to dig myself out of that hole. But I struggle sometimes trying to get people to understand the positive side of approaching a negative. So what I'm saying here is that the boundaries that mass shootings have broken down have a lot of people really scared emotionally, spiritually, and so on. And we've got to fight against that. We can't go out even to a restaurant and think, oh boy, tonight's the night I might get killed. We've got to get away from that. Or my kids going to school. We've got to be diligent, and we've got to be proactive in our community to make sure we know what our community functions like. I tell the police in the city that as my job, it's not really my job, it's part of what I represent as a city councilman, is that we have got to continue changing the culture that we have just from 3 or 4 years ago, so we continue to be feeling safer and more secure in our community. But it's us with you and you and you to make that a strong community.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, boundaries for safety, very important. Yeah, thank you.
I guess, okay, I started off with one comment to make, but I'd like to follow up on what Dwight was saying. We can't always live in fear. We walked out, years ago I realized walking down a city sidewalk, You never know when someone's going to suddenly veer off and hit you, or a child's going to run out between two cars, and you might have to, well, I'm thinking of a Becky French years ago. And, you know, but we have to just accept that some things are going to happen to someone. Maybe yes, maybe the, you know, where if you would raise your hand and you say the word Mandarin, or someone says the word Mandarin, and you would get $1 million, but somebody in China would die. I mean, that sort of thing is just, I mean, you can't imagine all the consequences of what we do. And we have to, you know, just learn to cope with what life brings to us. So.
And I like what you said about fear, because fear is a motivator. But fear sometimes motivates us to inaction, and to focus on what we just said, fear to action.
I've been practicing boundaries for a long time now,
Good for you.
and it all started with Star Trek. I really struggled with the idea of what a boundary is until I was watching Star Trek, and Kirk would yell, or Picard would yell, "Shields up." And I have that mental image every time I need a boundary. I quietly say to myself, okay, shields up. And that's, it sounds silly, but that's a mental image that has really, really helped. And so sometimes, you know, in the struggle to do something new or different, if you can equate it with something, a mental image, a quote, something of that nature, it can really help. And now it's second nature.
Anything that works is not silly.
In close relationships, individuals that don't respect boundaries, at some point, it becomes abuse. Even though there may not be bruises, there may not be those kinds of, you know, things going on, but people that don't understand in close relationships those boundaries, it becomes abusive. Yes.
I appreciate you drawing from the Christian tradition, and I really think that it is part of, you know, I started out as a Unitarian, i.e., I really believe Jesus is not a God, but that's, you know, that's part of the fundamental part of the beliefs. But, you know, I think sometimes we are so beat up by some of the people that we don't recognize that drawing from Christian traditions as well as, you know, Indian traditions and Buddhists and all is part of our faith.
It is. Thank you.
I'm reminded of a saying, we train people how to treat us by what we do. And just underscore your point of the importance of setting those boundaries. But it's up to us to make it happen.
It is. I like that quote. Thank you.
In my experience, it takes a very, very long time to get to that point, you know? It's kind of like women struggled for 60 years to get the right to vote, and I internally struggled a long time to be able to say no.
Yeah. And then sometimes it's, you know,
Can't run as fast as I have been in a situation, and I bet many of you have, where my boundaries conflict. And I will give you an example from my personal life. Most of you know that I have been divorced. But one of the things that happened during that divorce was that I and my former wife promised that we would never disparage the other. We did not want to have any kind of words coming out of our mouth that our children could hear, for all kinds of reasons. But one of my boundaries had to do with what kinds of movies I would allow the kids to see. And then they would say, well, Mom, let's us see them. And I said, you're right. And she can do that. Because when you are with her, she has the right to decide what her boundaries are. But when you're living with me, I have the right. And my boundaries are a little different. But that doesn't mean that one of us is right and what the other is wrong.
Yeah, very true. Thank you.
My thing with setting boundaries, and it took me many, many long years before I could do that, is it's not just getting to the point of being able to say no or set a boundary. Then the challenge is maintaining it.
That is the challenge.
And that's harder. I mean, it really is, because it's so easy, especially when a person might really be angry at you, to want to back down to avoid that. And I think if you think about it before you do it, and you know it's what you need to do, then you have to be strong enough to maintain it and not back down.
Give Annette the next to the last, and then I'll see Pam.
One of the things I came here today hoping I'd hear an answer, and I'm still working on it. No offense, you did a good job. But I struggle with when am I being a jerk or am I establishing boundaries? And there's a Reddit group called Am I the Blank? It starts with an A, where people will pose situations and how they've responded. And I know there probably is some sort of quiz or test or something you can take to determine what's an appropriate boundary, or are you truly being a jerk? And I think as people with compassion, it's easier to not, I don't know if I'm trying to say this right. Sometimes we don't keep up good boundaries because we don't want to be a jerk. And I think just differentiating, or when do we need to give, when do we step out of what's comfortable, it's making that, just having that discernment to know which is the right path to take.
I think if you're engaging in self-care, self-protection, you're not being a jerk. I think there are times that you may not want to do something, but you can go ahead and do it as long as it's something you say, well, I really don't want to, but I'll be okay doing it. I'm not going to lie in bed all night long beating myself up because I did it. It wasn't that big of a deal. There are times you can give in if it's not going to cause you emotional distress. How does that answer your
Give
question?
Pam the last word.
Of course.
And she's going to ask the toughest question,
No,
too.
I'm not going to ask a question, but sometimes I mess up my own boundaries in that I think, well, I can do that better than anybody else could, so I should go ahead and do it, right? So sometimes I do that to myself, even though I've told myself I should say no. And then I say yes, and then I say yes, and then I have a crisis of, of what you had said, you get too anxious and you get overwhelmed. And so now I tell people that for the next 6 months, everything is a no. And I tell people that I'm going to have to say no to you because I've promised myself to say no to everything for the next 6 months. So when I say no,
So if Ed McMahon knocks on your door and says, would you like this Publishers Clearinghouse check for $1 million, you're going to say no.
Just say no, Pam.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. It's always a pleasure being here.
$330. Very good text. Thank you, Joan. Good tune, better tune than the first one. Okay. If you are willing and able, please stand and let's sing together 330 and remain standing for the benediction, and then we can sit for the postlude.
However you perceive this morning's message, let me just leave you with these words. Go and be good to yourselves.